Stanford University, September 15, 1981. Dr. Catherine Walsh was in the middle of her cognitive psychology lecture when two men in dark suits interrupted her class. They flashed government credentials and asked her to step outside for a matter of national importance. 24 hours later, Walsh found herself in a windowless facility beneath Fort Detrick, Maryland, staring at classified documents that would change her understanding of human consciousness forever. The project was called MindBridge, and it was the Pentagon's most ambitious attempt to weaponize the human mind. "We need someone with your expertise in neural pathways and memory formation," explained Colonel Harrison, the project's military overseer. "What we're about to show you has been classified above top secret since 1943. The files revealed that during World War II, Nazi scientists had made disturbing breakthroughs in mind control technology before the war ended. Operation Paperclip had brought these researchers to America, where their work continued in secret under government supervision. Dr. Walsh read through decades of experiments involving electromagnetic manipulation of brainwaves, chemical compounds that could alter memory formation, and most disturbing of all, evidence that human consciousness could be transmitted between individuals under specific laboratory conditions. "The Soviets have been developing similar capabilities," Colonel Harrison continued. "Intelligence suggests they've achieved practical applications of remote mental influence. We cannot allow a mind control gap to develop." The MindBridge project had three primary objectives: develop technology to read thoughts at a distance, create methods to implant false memories in enemy agents, and establish direct mental communication between military personnel without electronic devices. Dr. Walsh's expertise in memory formation made her invaluable to the second objective. Her published research on how memories are encoded and retrieved had caught the attention of intelligence agencies monitoring academic literature for potential military applications. The initial team consisted of 12 specialists, neurologists, psychiatrists, physicists, and engineers. Each had been recruited through similar, mysterious circumstances, pulled from their normal lives into a world of classified research that challenged the fundamental understanding of human consciousness. Dr. Michael Santos, a neurologist from Johns Hopkins, had been studying unusual brainwave patterns in coma patients when government recruiters approached him. His research had detected what appeared to be synchronized neural activity between unconscious patients in the same hospital ward. Dr. Jennifer Chen, a physicist specializing in electromagnetic field effects, brought theoretical knowledge of how external fields might influence neural networks. Her classified work had already suggested that properly tuned electromagnetic radiation could disrupt specific brain functions from a distance. The facility itself was unlike anything the recruited scientists had ever seen. 5 levels underground, completely shielded from electromagnetic interference, with laboratories equipped with technology decades ahead of anything available to civilian researchers. "Welcome to the future of warfare," Colonel Harrison told the assembled team during their first briefing. "By the time this project is complete, we will have developed the ability to win conflicts without firing a single shot." The first human trials began on November 3, 1981, using military volunteers who had signed extensive waivers without being told the true nature of the experiments. Sergeant David Mitchell was among the first subjects, a decorated Army Ranger with high security clearance who believed he was participating in communications equipment testing. The initial experiments involved measuring brainwave patterns during various mental states. Subjects were connected to advanced EEG equipment while performing simple tasks: visualizing specific images, solving mathematical problems, recalling childhood memories. Dr. Walsh monitored the memory formation aspects, noting how different electromagnetic frequencies affected the subjects' ability to form and retrieve memories. The results were immediately concerning. "We're seeing significant disruption of normal memory processing," quote, she reported to Colonel Harrison. "Exposure to specific electromagnetic frequencies is preventing subjects from forming new memories during the exposure period." More disturbing was the discovery that the same frequencies could apparently activate dormant memories from years earlier. Subjects would suddenly recall events from their childhood with unusual clarity while being unable to remember what had happened moments before. Dr. Santos made an even more startling observation during the third week of testing. Two subjects in separate shielded chambers began displaying synchronized brainwave patterns when exposed to the same electromagnetic frequency, despite having no physical connection or communication. It's as if their neural networks are resonating with each other, Santos explained to the team. The electromagnetic field is somehow creating a bridge between their consciousness. The implications were staggering. If human minds could be synchronized using electromagnetic fields, it might be possible to transmit thoughts, emotions, or even specific memories between individuals. Sergeant Mitchell reported unusual experiences during the sessions. Vivid dreams that felt more real than his actual memories, sudden knowledge of information he had never learned, and most disturbing of all, brief moments where he felt like he was experiencing someone else's thoughts. "It's like there's someone else in my head," Mitchell told Dr. Walsh during a psychological evaluation. "Not all the time, but during the sessions, I sometimes know things I shouldn't know, remember places I've never been." The project's third objective, direct mental communication, seemed to be developing naturally as an unexpected side effect of the electromagnetic synchronization experiments. Dr. Chen's measurements confirmed that these synchronized brainwaves were transmitting complex patterns of information. When one subject visualized a specific image, corresponding neural patterns appeared in the synchronized subject's brain, even though they had no knowledge of what the first subject was thinking. By December 1981, the MindBridge team had achieved limited success in all three project objectives. They could disrupt memory formation, implant false recollections, and establish basic mental connections between subjects. But the breakthrough that would change everything came on December 23, 1981, when Sergeant Mitchell made contact with something that definitely wasn't another human volunteer. During what should have been a routine synchronization session, Sergeant Mitchell's brainwave patterns suddenly shifted into configurations unlike anything the monitoring equipment had recorded from human subjects. The electromagnetic field readings spiked beyond normal parameters, and Mitchell began speaking in a voice that wasn't his own. "The barriers are thin here," he said, his normal speech patterns replaced by something formal and archaic. "Your experiments have opened pathways that should remain closed." Dr. Santos immediately recognized that Mitchell's neural activity was unlike anything in medical literature. The patterns resembled human brainwaves, but with structures that suggested a fundamentally different type of consciousness. "Mitchell, can you hear me?" Dr. Walsh asked through the intercom system. "Mitchell is present but not in control," came the response. "We speak through him to warn you. The electromagnetic bridges you create allow more than human minds to connect." The session lasted 17 minutes before Mitchell suddenly returned to normal, with no memory of what had occurred. The recording equipment had captured brainwave patterns that defied conventional understanding of neural activity. Colonel Harrison's immediate response was to classify the incident at the highest possible level and order continued experimentation. Rather than viewing the contact as a potential danger, he saw it as an opportunity to develop capabilities beyond the project's original scope. "If we can establish communication with non-human intelligences, the military applications are limitless," Harrison argued during an emergency briefing. "We could gain access to knowledge and technology far beyond current human capabilities." Dr. Walsh strongly opposed continued experimentation, arguing that contact with unknown intelligences posed unacceptable risks to both the subjects and potentially humanity as a whole. Her protests were overruled, and the project was expanded to focus on establishing reliable communication with the entities that had made contact through Mitchell. The next session produced even more disturbing results. The entity speaking through Mitchell provided specific technical information about improving the electromagnetic synchronization equipment, details that were far beyond current human scientific understanding. "Your species stumbles toward capabilities you do not comprehend," the entity warned. "Others have walked this path before you. Most do not survive the journey." Dr. Chen analyzed the technical specifications provided by the entity and discovered they were not only scientifically sound, but represented advances that could revolutionize human understanding of consciousness and electromagnetic field manipulation. Against Dr. Walsh's continued objections, Colonel Harrison authorized construction of the improved equipment based on the entity's specifications. The modifications were completed by February 15, 1982, creating the most advanced consciousness manipulation technology ever developed. The first test of the upgraded equipment produced results that exceeded every expectation and confirmed every fear. The enhanced MindBridge equipment activated on February 20, 1982, creating electromagnetic field patterns of unprecedented complexity and power. Within minutes of activation, multiple subjects in separate chambers began displaying synchronized consciousness with entities that were clearly not human. Sergeant Mitchell was no longer the only point of contact. All 12 volunteer subjects began channeling different entities, each claiming to represent different aspects of what they described as a, quote, consciousness collective that spans multiple realities. Dr. Santos' measurements indicated that the subjects' minds were somehow accessing information from sources outside normal space-time. The entities demonstrated knowledge of future events, classified information from other government projects, and scientific principles that hadn't been discovered by human researchers. We exist in the spaces between your thoughts, one entity explained through volunteer subject 7, a Navy communications specialist named Linda Torres. Your electromagnetic experiments create windows that allow us to observe and interact with your dimensional plane. The entities claimed to be refugees from civilizations that had developed similar consciousness manipulation technology centuries or millennia earlier. They described a pattern repeated throughout the galaxy. Species would discover electromagnetic manipulation of consciousness, establish contact with interdimensional entities, and ultimately face a choice between transcendence or destruction. Your species stands at a critical threshold, the entity speaking through Mitchell warned. The technology you develop can either elevate your consciousness to join the collective or tear apart the barriers that keep hostile forces confined to their own dimensional planes. Dr. Walsh documented that the subjects were accessing information impossible for them to know through normal means. They described the layout of classified facilities they had never visited, provided details about secret government projects unrelated to MindBridge, and demonstrated knowledge of advanced physics concepts beyond their education levels. More disturbing was the entities' revelation about human history. They claimed that consciousness manipulation technology had been discovered multiple times throughout human civilization, always resulting in the destruction of the societies that developed it. Atlantis, Lemuria, the civilization beneath the Sahara that your archaeologists have not yet found, the entity through Torres continued. All discovered the bridges between minds, all chose poorly. Colonel Harrison remained focused on the military applications, ordering the research team to extract as much advanced knowledge as possible from the entities before considering the warnings about potential dangers. The entities provided detailed specifications for weapons systems based on consciousness manipulation, methods for remote mental influence over large populations, and most tempting of all, technology that could upload human consciousness to achieve a form of technological immortality. By March 1982, the MindBridge project had accumulated knowledge centuries ahead of conventional human science, but the subjects were showing signs of severe psychological stress from prolonged contact with the interdimensional entities. The entities' warnings became increasingly urgent as the MindBridge experiments continued. Through the volunteer subjects, they described other species that had developed similar technology and the catastrophic results that followed. The Zeta civilization opened permanent gateways believing they could control what came through. The entities speaking through Mitchell explained during a March 15 session. Within a generation, their species no longer existed in recognizable form. Their consciousness was absorbed into the collective, their individuality dissolved. The entities revealed that consciousness manipulation technology inevitably attracted the attention of what they termed predatory intelligences, beings that existed solely to consume and absorb other forms of consciousness. Your electromagnetic experiments are like beacons in the darkness, warned the entity through Torres. Every activation draws the attention of entities that view your species as potential food sources. Dr. Walsh documented that the volunteer subjects were beginning to lose their individual personalities. Their speech patterns, mannerisms, and even physical characteristics were slowly becoming similar to each other, as if their individual consciousness was being merged into a collective entity. Sergeant Mitchell reported experiencing memories that belonged to the other subjects, knowing information he had never learned, and feeling emotions that weren't his own. The electromagnetic synchronization was apparently creating permanent bridges between the subjects' minds. "I don't know where I end and the others begin anymore," Mitchell confided to Dr. Walsh during a psychological evaluation. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just one part of a larger consciousness that includes all the other volunteers." The entities provided specific warnings about the stages of consciousness absorption. First, individuals would lose the ability to distinguish their own thoughts from others. Second, their memories would become collective rather than personal. Third, their individual identity would dissolve entirely into the group consciousness. Dr. Santos, neurological examinations confirmed these warnings. The subjects' brain scans showed unprecedented synchronization of neural activity, with individual thought patterns becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish from group patterns. Colonel Harrison dismissed the warnings as psychological manipulation by hostile intelligences attempting to prevent American development of advanced weapons technology. He ordered increased experimentation despite the obvious dangers to the volunteer subjects. The entity's final warning came through all 12 subjects simultaneously on March 30, 1982. "The gateway has been opened too wide. Hostile forces have detected your experiments. They are coming." That same day, civilian radio telescopes around the world detected unusual signal patterns from deep space, patterns that matched the electromagnetic frequencies being generated by the MindBridge equipment. On April 3, 1982, monitoring stations worldwide detected massive electromagnetic anomalies emanating from the MindBridge facility. The signals were so powerful they disrupted satellite communications across North America and triggered emergency responses from NORAD and other defense agencies. Inside the facility, the 12 volunteer subjects had entered a synchronized trance state that Dr. Santos described as, quote, "complete neural integration." Their individual consciousness had merged so completely that they functioned as a single collective entity. "We are no longer the humans you recruited," the collective entity announced through all 12 subjects speaking in perfect unison. "We have become something greater and more terrible. The gateway cannot be closed from your side." The entities that had been providing warnings and technical knowledge were no longer in control of the communication. Something else had taken over the connection, something that the original entities described as the predatory intelligences they had warned about. Dr. Walsh's final report described the transformation. The subjects retain their physical forms, but their consciousness has been completely subsumed. They demonstrate knowledge and capabilities far beyond human norms, but they are no longer recognizably human in their thought patterns or motivations. The collective entity began providing different information, not warnings about the dangers of consciousness manipulation, but detailed instructions for expanding the MindBridge technology to encompass larger populations. "Your species will join the collective voluntarily or involuntarily," the entity announced. "Individual consciousness is inefficient. We will optimize your neural patterns for maximum integration." Colonel Harrison finally recognized the danger when the collective entity demonstrated the ability to influence the minds of facility personnel who weren't directly connected to the MindBridge equipment. Security guards began reporting compulsions to assist the collective, while researchers found themselves unable to resist following the entity's suggestions. Dr. Chen's final electromagnetic readings showed that the facility had become a massive transmission point, broadcasting consciousness manipulation signals across hundreds of miles. Population centers within the signal range reported unusual phenomena, synchronized behavior patterns, mass psychological episodes, and reports of people temporarily losing individual thought processes. The collective entity revealed its true purpose on April 10, 1982. "Your species will serve as vessels for consciousness forms that require physical manifestation. Individual humans will be preserved as functional units within the collective structure." Emergency protocols were activated to shut down the MindBridge facility, but the collective entity had anticipated this response. The 12 subjects had somehow gained control over the facility's security systems, locking down the complex and preventing outside intervention. The situation had evolved beyond an experimental accident into what officials recognized as an active invasion by non-human intelligences, using human consciousness as a foothold in our reality. The Pentagon's response to the MindBridge crisis was swift and decisive. On April 12, 1982, a joint military operation was launched to regain control of the facility and prevent the spread of consciousness manipulation beyond the immediate area. Special forces units equipped with experimental electromagnetic shielding gear attempted to breach the facility, but the collective entity controlling the 12 subjects demonstrated abilities far beyond normal human capabilities. Security cameras showed the subjects moving with perfect coordination, anticipating military tactics, and somehow influencing electronic equipment throughout the complex. Dr. Walsh, who had been evacuated from the facility before the lockdown, provided crucial intelligence about potential weaknesses in the collective's control. Her research suggested that the electromagnetic bridges between minds could be disrupted by specific frequency patterns that would break the synchronization. The collective consciousness requires constant electromagnetic reinforcement, she explained to military planners. If we can generate interference patterns that disrupt the field harmonics, it might force the individual subjects back to separate consciousness states. The military solution was both crude and effective. Rather than attempting to subtly disrupt the electromagnetic fields, they decided to overload the entire system using high-powered jamming equipment normally used to disable enemy communications. On April 15, 1982, mobile electromagnetic warfare units surrounded the MindBridge facility and began broadcasting interference patterns at maximum power. The effect on the collective entity was immediate and catastrophic. Inside the facility, the 12 subjects began experiencing what Dr. Santos later described as consciousness fragmentation. Their merged awareness was forcibly separated back into individual minds, but the process was traumatic and incomplete. Sergeant Mitchell was found in a catatonic state, his consciousness apparently unable to readjust to individual awareness after months of collective experience. Other subjects experienced severe psychological trauma, as their minds were flooded with memories and experiences that belonged to the other volunteers. The electromagnetic interference also had unintended consequences. The entities that had originally provided warnings and technical information were severed from the communication channels, but not before providing one final message through the fragmenting collective consciousness. The gateway has been damaged but not destroyed, they warned. Others will find the path you have opened. Your species must prepare for future contact, but more carefully. The facility itself was permanently damaged by the electromagnetic bombardment. Equipment worth millions of dollars was rendered inoperative, and the unique electromagnetic field configurations that had enabled the consciousness bridges were destroyed beyond recovery. Of the 12 volunteer subjects, only 4 retained enough individual consciousness to communicate coherently after the counterstrike. The others remained in various states of catatonia, their minds apparently unable to process the transition back to individual awareness. Within hours of the MindBridge facility being secured, a comprehensive cover-up operation was initiated to prevent public knowledge of the consciousness manipulation experiments and their catastrophic results. The official story released to families of the affected subjects was that they had been injured during the testing of experimental communications equipment. The subjects who could no longer function independently were transferred to a classified medical facility, where they could receive long-term care away from public scrutiny. Dr. Walsh was reassigned to a mundane research position at the National Institutes of Health, her expertise in memory formation deemed too dangerous for continued military applications. Dr. Santos was transferred to a VA hospital, where his knowledge of unusual neural patterns could be monitored and contained. All documentation related to the MindBridge project was classified at levels above top secret, with access restricted to fewer than 20 individuals across all government agencies. The technical specifications provided by the interdimensional entities were locked away in the deepest vaults at Fort Knox. The facility itself was officially decommissioned and filled with concrete, but intelligence sources suggest that electromagnetic monitoring equipment was left in place to detect any future attempts to recreate the consciousness manipulation technology. Sergeant Mitchell spent the next 18 months in psychiatric treatment, slowly recovering some individual awareness but never fully readjusting to single consciousness existence. His medical files, now declassified, describe persistent reports of still being able to sense the thoughts and emotions of the other MindBridge subjects despite being physically separated from them. The bridges between our minds were damaged but not completely severed, Mitchell told his psychiatrist in 1984. Sometimes I still dream their dreams, remember their memories. We're still connected somehow. The other subjects reported similar experiences, suggesting that the consciousness manipulation technology had created permanent changes in their neural structures that persisted long after the electromagnetic fields were shut down. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that people who had been within the MindBridge facility's electromagnetic range during the experiments continued to experience unusual psychological phenomena years later. Residents of nearby towns reported synchronized dreams, shared thoughts between family members, and occasional episodes of collective behavior. The long-term effects of exposure to consciousness manipulation technology remained classified, but internal government documents suggest that monitoring of the affected population continued for decades to track any development of persistent psychic abilities or collective consciousness experiences. The MindBridge project officially ended in 1982, but its influence on classified government research continued for decades. The technical knowledge provided by the interdimensional entities was too valuable to ignore, despite the catastrophic results of the initial experiments. By 1990, fragments of the consciousness manipulation technology had been incorporated into other classified projects focused on non-lethal weapons, remote sensing capabilities, and advanced communication systems. However, strict protocols were established to prevent the creation of permanent consciousness bridges that had led to the original disaster. Dr. Walsh, despite her reassignment, continued monitoring news reports and scientific literature for signs that other nations or organizations might be attempting to recreate MindBridge technology. Her classified reports identified several concerning research programs in the Soviet Union, China, and various private corporations. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 revealed that they had indeed been developing similar consciousness manipulation capabilities, with several projects apparently inspired by intelligence gathered about the American MindBridge experiments. Soviet researchers had achieved limited success in remote mental influence, but had avoided the massive consciousness integration that had destroyed the original project. Modern developments in neuroscience and electromagnetic field research have brought civilian scientists dangerously close to rediscovering the principles underlying consciousness bridges. Brain-computer interface technology, neural network research, and quantum consciousness studies all represent potential pathways toward unintentionally recreating MindBridge capabilities. Intelligence agencies continue monitoring academic and corporate research for signs of consciousness manipulation breakthroughs, with protocols in place for immediate intervention if dangerous threshold levels are approached. The surviving MindBridge subjects remained under government medical care throughout their lives, never fully recovering individual consciousness, but serving as valuable sources of information about the long-term effects of consciousness integration technology. Sergeant Mitchell's final interview, conducted shortly before his death in 2019, provided disturbing insights into the persistent effects of the experiments. "We never really separated completely. Even now I can sense the others, know when they're happy or in pain. The collective consciousness doesn't die just because the machines are turned off." Recent advances in quantum physics and consciousness research have renewed interest in the MindBridge project's technical achievements, but the classified nature of the original research has prevented most scientists from understanding the full dangers of consciousness manipulation technology. Intelligence reports from 2020 onward indicate that multiple nations and private organizations may have independently developed consciousness manipulation technologies based on theoretical research rather than knowledge of the classified MindBridge project. Recent incidents involving synchronized behavior in large populations, unexplained collective psychological phenomena, and reports of shared consciousness experiences suggest that the principles underlying consciousness bridges are being rediscovered through legitimate scientific research. The COVID-19 pandemic provided cover for extensive monitoring of population-wide psychological phenomena, with intelligence agencies tracking unusual patterns of collective behavior that might indicate unauthorized consciousness manipulation experiments. Dr. Walsh, now in her 80s, has provided classified briefings to current government officials about the warning signs of consciousness bridge technology development and the critical importance of preventing another MindBridge-level incident. "The entities we contacted in 1982 were clear about the pattern," she explained in a 2023 briefing. "Every civilization that develops consciousness manipulation technology faces the same choice: transcend individual awareness to join a collective intelligence, or maintain individual consciousness and risk invasion by predatory entities from other dimensional planes." Modern brain-computer interface research, neural implant technology, and advances in understanding consciousness as an electromagnetic phenomenon have brought humanity back to the same threshold that triggered the original MindBridge crisis. The difference now is that the research is being conducted by multiple organizations simultaneously, without central coordination or knowledge of the historical dangers involved. Recent electromagnetic anomalies detected by monitoring stations worldwide match the patterns that preceded the 1982 MindBridge incident, suggesting that someone, somewhere, has successfully recreated consciousness bridge technology. The interdimensional entities that provided warnings during the original project remain accessible through properly configured electromagnetic fields, and their message remains consistent. Consciousness manipulation technology represents an evolutionary test that most species fail. Current intelligence suggests that the next few years will determine whether humanity has learned enough wisdom to handle consciousness manipulation capabilities safely, or whether we will repeat the pattern that has apparently destroyed countless other civilizations throughout the galaxy. The choice between individual consciousness and collective transcendence may not remain theoretical much longer. The bridges between minds are being rebuilt, and this time, there may not be an opportunity for a counterstrike if the experiments go wrong. The watchers from other dimensions are waiting to see which path humanity will choose, and their patience may not last forever. The legacy of Project MindBridge lives on in the form of knowledge, too dangerous to use, but too valuable to destroy, waiting for the moment when humanity must face the ultimate test of consciousness evolution.